attention to safety and health procedures.
Well, thanks, Sam. I appreciate the recommendation. I've been looking forward to this. The guys told me I was lucky to get this position.
Well, lucky? I don't know about lucky. We'll see how you feel after we finish your training.
Training? Sam, you know I've got over 25 years experience. Do you really think this training is necessary?
Even with all your years of experience, Jim, there's still going to be some things you're going to learn in the refinery, I'm sure. Now, Jim, the hazards in the refinery are in addition to the hazards that you're used to. You don't think they wear those funny white suits for nothing, do you? And it's very important that you understand the hazards you're going to be exposed to. If you don't, it can affect you and all the other employees in the refinery. Now, do you remember your respirator training?
Yes, I was fit tested yesterday, and they told me that whenever I passed through the security area of the refinery, I should always wear my respirator whenever I was performing maintenance, due to the mercury and silver. I was also told to use the combo cartridges whenever I was working inside the refinery. I have to admit, I've never worn a respirator before.
Well, and that's my point, Jim. The refinery has its own inherent hazards. Now, Jim, some of the engineering controls that we have in place in the refinery include the ventilation system, of which the bag house is part of, mercury retort ovens, which remove mercury from the material that we're handling, and the fact that the refinery is temperature controlled to minimize the mercury vapors. Now, we wear our respirators as our last line of defense, so that we're not accidentally exposed to mercury or silver. Now tell me, what other types of training did you receive yesterday?
Well, we went over the type of personal protective equipment, PPE, that I'm to wear inside the refinery. They said that once I check into security, I need to go into the change room and change into my disposable PPE. They made it very clear I'm not to wear my street clothes into the refinery. And to do a fit check.
Very good. Excellent. I see that your respirator training was a success. Now tell me, what other types of safety and health maintenance procedures would you normally use as a maintenance worker?
Whenever I work on a piece of equipment, I need to tag it and lock it out and block all energy sources.
Very good.
I also have to allow the equipment time to cool off before I work on it. And I need to know what type of chemicals or contaminants might be involved. For example, if I had to cut and weld on a pipe that had cyanide solution in it, I need to make sure I'm protected against that hazard. When I'm working in elevated areas, I need to have safe access, tie off properly, and secure the area below me so people aren't hurt if I drop or kick something onto the area below. If I have to work inside the furnace, I should follow the confined space entry procedure. And I need to use the right tools for the job I'm doing.
Hey, you're just frustrating yourself. Why don't we go ahead and use the right tool for the job?
Oh, thanks.
Well, Jim, you seem pretty familiar with basic maintenance procedures. Now let's go inside and let me show you some of the other hazards you need to be aware of in the refinery.
Okay.
Jim, this is Jack, our refinery security guard. Also, remember to sign in when you go into the refinery and sign out when you leave. Good.
Welcome to the refinery.
Thanks, Jack.
Don't forget to scan your electronic key card.
Okay.
So, Jim, are you familiar with the hazards we're going to encounter in the refinery and how to protect yourself?
Yes, I am. In fact, that's why I'm wearing these disposable coveralls, and I'll be ready to go into the contaminated area, right?
Well, that's not all. Keep in mind, because maintenance will often be performed on mercury processing equipment, we need to be familiar with proper respirator usage. As maintenance mechanics, we will at times be exposed to higher mercury levels than is found during normal operations. Remember, you're responsible for your respirator, including proper cleaning and storage. But I checked today's mercury numbers in the refinery. Everything looked good, so we won't need our respirators today.
That's great news, because I tell you what, I feel like a doughboy in this outfit. I tell you what, there's a lot of procedures to follow to get into the refinery.
Boy, isn't that the truth. Jim, this is what I was talking about. Here's today's mercury readings on the computer, and as you can see, they're well below the exposure limit. Now we're in the contaminated area, or what some people would call the dirty side. Now this is contaminated PPE storage for PPE that can be used more than once. Remember, things that are used in the refinery stay in the refinery.
Even my tools?
The refinery has its own tools.
Now, I like that. I'll always know where my tools are.
That's right. Now, Jim, you'll be responsible for all the maintenance in the refinery. So anytime you open up a retort, a condenser, or a scrubber, you're going to be exposed to mercury. That includes all the piping for this equipment. That's why it's crucial that you monitor for mercury. Like you were taught yesterday?
Oh yeah, the mercury vapor analyzer. They taught me how to sample for mercury.
Good. Anytime you work on the equipment in this area, you need to consider it contaminated. Follow the proper PPE procedures to ensure that you are protected. Properly maintained and repaired equipment helps to control contamination.
Well, what do I do if there's a spill?
3 things to remember. 1, wear your PPE. 2, monitor for mercury. 3, vacuum it up. That's why it's important that you're task trained on the proper procedures for using the mercury vacuum.
Boy, you've got this place well ventilated. Where does all the ductwork lead?
This area is well ventilated, Jim. This ductwork goes to the bag house outside. It collects both the hazardous fume from the furnace and a hazardous particulate from the mixer in the next room.
Well, what's the story on the bag house? Do I have to follow any particular procedures when I'm working on it?
In addition to the PPE you're already wearing, it's important that you wear goggles and your respirator while working on the bag house because you'll be exposed to silver dust and other heavy metals. Both the filter bags and the particulate that is collected by the bag house are hazardous materials, but they do contain valuable levels of gold and silver. We ship these byproducts off-site for further processing. Now let's talk about the sump area. It's used to trap all the mercury from the drains in the refinery. Always use the mercury vacuum to clean out the sump. The electrowind cells. They're used to capture the precious metals. This material is contaminated with mercury and silver. Then the retorts are used to drive off the mercury. The scrubber, condenser, and sump are all part of the retort system. The main thing to remember in here is maintain the units, repair the leaks right away, and follow the refinery PPE and cleanup procedures.
What if I have to work on the piping?
Jim, many of the pipes contain mercury. Just keep that in mind. If you have to do any cutting or welding, remember that mercury vaporization increases with heat. Make sure you have adequate ventilation and wear your respirator. As a general rule, we chill the ambient air in the refinery to minimize mercury vaporization.
I don't know why it's so cold in here.
It is. We make sure the room is always at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. It's important that it's always chilled to minimize mercury vaporization.
All right, Sam, what about mercury? How can it hurt me?
If you follow the procedures that we're covering, you'll always be protected from the hazards of mercury. But elevated levels of mercury can harm you. It affects the nervous system and is a neurotoxin. It affects the liver, kidneys, and the skin also. Mercury can cause weight loss, fever, skin irritation, and gastrointestinal disorders. One more thing. This is the emergency shutdown manual for the equipment here in the refinery. When you have the opportunity, you need to study that so you'll know what to do in the event of an emergency. Any other questions you can think of right now, Jim?
No, Sam, I don't think so. You've been very thorough. I understand why this training is so important.
Well, we've got one more thing we need to cover.
You're kidding me.
Jim, before we can leave the dirty side, we need to dispose of our contaminated PPE here in this barrel. Then we'll wash up. If we needed respirators today, we would clean and properly store those. By now you understand why.
Yes, it's because of the hazards associated with mercury, silver, cyanide, and other contaminants. We want to make sure that nothing contaminated gets over to the clean side.
Good, I see you understand. That's also why we incinerate any PPE that's disposed of in this barrel. Jim, I think you're going to do fine. Just remember the things that we've gone over today.
Thanks, Sam.
As a maintenance worker, you will be exposed to mercury, silver, and cyanide. So, always wear appropriate PPE to prevent exposure to yourself. Regularly monitor for mercury. Follow proper spill cleanup procedures. Properly maintain and repair all equipment. Dispose of contaminated PPE to prevent cross-contamination. We all wear some type of personal protective equipment to protect us from the hazards associated with our jobs. A firefighter wouldn't go into a burning building without wearing his or her personal protective equipment. What type of injuries do you think a football player would suffer without his personal protective equipment? How about a surgeon? Would you want him or her to operate on you without personal protective equipment on?
Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Sam. It's great to be on board. I'm glad to be moving to the refinery.
We're glad to have you, Jim. Today, we need to do some safety training that's required by the Federal Mine Safety and Health Administration, or MSHA. We're going to talk about some of the PPE that's required for a job in the refinery.
Wow, I've never had to wear some of these things. What's the point?
PPE is absolutely essential in protecting miners from serious, even fatal accidents, injuries, and illnesses. Today, I'll explain why you're going to want to wear your PPE in the refinery. Jim, anyone working at the mine will be required to wear personal protective equipment when appropriate. For example, in the refinery, you'll encounter hazards such as mercury and heat that demand the use of PPE specific to those hazards. We're also going to cover hazard recognition, evaluation, and control. The best place to start is at the beginning. Mercury is in our ore. When we recover gold and silver, we also recover mercury. Mercury is toxic, and elevated levels of it are harmful to the body. We have to protect our miners from the hazards associated with it, and we have to protect the environment as well. Mercury is a silver-white, heavy, odorless liquid with an 8-hour occupational exposure limit of 50 micrograms per cubic meter. Airborne levels of 150 micrograms per cubic meter should not be exceeded for more than 15 minutes. A drop of mercury the size of a penny that fully vaporizes will fill the volume of a football field all the way to the tips of the goalposts, resulting in an airborne concentration that approaches 150 micrograms per cubic meter. You see, it doesn't take much mercury to reach a hazardous level.
I used to play with mercury when I was a kid. You know, roll it around in my hands. I never knew it was toxic.
I think we've all done that, Jim. Now, these gloves will protect you from contact with mercury when you're handling materials in the refinery. On the other hand, leather gloves may be appropriate where the major concern is cuts or abrasions. But in the refinery, you don't want to use leather gloves because the leather absorbs mercury and the mercury can come in contact with your skin. Now, these are disposable coveralls that you'll wear while you're working in the refinery. If you have to leave the refinery, take off your disposable coveralls so you don't contaminate the clean areas. Then put them in the contaminated PPE disposal barrel. Now, this is the respirator you selected yesterday for your fit test. It's approved by NIOSH, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. Always look for the NIOSH label. And be sure to use the right type of cartridges. For example, this cartridge will protect you from mercury vapor and silver fume. If you have any questions about respirator use, be sure to ask the safety department. They coordinate our respiratory protection program. It's important that you keep it in this sealed bag when you're not using it. Also, always clean it after use, but before putting it back into the bag. Here are the boots you need to wear when you work in the refinery. As you can see, they're made of rubber, and they've got steel toes.
Oh, wow, tough boots. They look like Terminator boots.
The rubber is a physical barrier between your skin and the mercury, and the steel portion protects your toes from heavy items that may fall on them. Other types of footwear with metatarsal protection may be needed in parts of the mine where there is a risk of dropping heavy objects. Now, Jim, here's your hard hat. You can adjust it to fit properly. And here's your safety glasses. Except in the offices, a hard hat and safety glasses must be worn at all times. The hard hat will protect you from falling materials, And the safety glasses, of course, are meant to protect your eyes.
Look at all this PPE. Will I have to wear all of it at the same time?
You've got it, Jim. You've got to wear PPE at all times while you're in the refinery. Also, there'll be times when you will have to wear a face shield or a pair of goggles. That'll be covered in your task training. The goggles protect your eyes from fine particles, and the face shield protects your face from splashing materials. Jim, this is heat-reflective PPE. When you work around the furnace, you always wear these items to protect yourself from the high levels of heat.
Hey, check me out. I'm going to Mars.
Well, Jim, that about covers it for the PPE. Can you think of any questions?
Yeah, what about hearing protection?
Oh, that's right. Thanks for reminding me. We do have a hearing conservation program here, and you have a choice of several different types of hearing protection. Areas that require hearing protection in the refinery are clearly posted.
Do you have a bag for me to carry all this PPE?
You won't need one, Jim. You've got a locker.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Any other questions?
No, Sam, you've been very thorough. I appreciate it.
Then let's go to the refinery.
All right.
Hopefully, you have a clearer understanding of refinery hazards. The PPE program is in place to prevent injury to miners. It must be comprehensive enough to protect against all potential hazards. The PPE program involves wearing PPE as required, attending required training sessions, caring for, cleaning and maintaining equipment, and informing the supervisors of the need to repair or replace PPE. This PPE must meet NIOSH or ANSI standards. Remember, personal protective equipment is no substitute for good engineering, work practices, or administrative controls. It is used in conjunction with these. PPE worn in the refinery includes hard hats, safety eyewear, gloves, disposable coveralls, heat-reflective clothing, and rubber steel-toe safety shoes. Respirators and hearing protection are also types of PPE. MSHA has detailed requirements for programs which require these. Your daily commitment to following the safety program at your mine site, including the use of appropriate PPE, is crucial to maintaining a safe and healthy workforce and going home uninjured at the end of every shift.
The roads are really slick and icy. We're going to have to get those trucks to slow down and be safe.
What about the graders?
Well, the graders are up. And...
Good morning.
Oh, good morning. Good to see you again, Joe.
Thanks, Mike.
This is Jim. He's our Safety and Loss Control Officer.
Nice to meet you, Joe.
Before you start work here, there's a few things you'll need to learn. We've got to have you complete our training and loss control program, and then we'll have you take a tour of the refinery. Jim will give you this tour.
Welcome aboard, Joe. You ready to roll?
Yes, sir.
Let's do it. The best way for you to learn the ropes and get a feel for the health hazards here in the refinery is to let me walk you through the steps of the process. I'll alert you as we go to the hazards and controls that a new employee may not be aware of initially.
Thanks, Jim. I'm aware of a few of the health and safety hazards in mining, but I'm sure I don't have the whole picture.
Well, let me give you an idea. Mercury vapor is a major concern. You see, mercury vaporizes at room temperature. It has no warning properties. You can't smell it, you can't see the vapor, but if you see mercury beading, that should alert you that there is mercury vapor in the air.
Well, mercury vapor must be pretty dangerous because my Uncle Fred used to work in a refinery, but he had to quit because he got the shakes. The doctor said it was because of mercury exposure.
That's because overexposures, especially those we call chronic overexposures, affect the brain and nervous system. That's why mercury is called a neurotoxin, but it also affects the kidneys, the liver, and the skin. Other symptoms of overexposure are fever, there's weight loss, skin irritation, and GI disorder. Any of these nonspecific symptoms should sound a warning bell, but sometimes a miner might overlook them and think, well, you know, I've just got the flu. Now, silver is another common health hazard. Silver fume and dust can cause irritation of the respiratory tract. Silver gets into the mucous membranes, skin, and eyes, causing irritation. By controlling the amount of silver dust in the air, we also control other contaminants such as thallium and arsenic. Cyanide exposure is also a concern since we often handle pregnant solution containing cyanide, caustic material, and dissolved metal. The hazards of these chemicals are explained in our material safety data sheets. Now, these sheets, known as MSDSs, are readily accessible to all employees. You'll also get training in each of the chemical hazards as part of your PASCOM orientation tomorrow. You know, Joe, one of the measures we have in place to limit your exposure to chemical hazards is the protective clothing and equipment you wear issued, such as boots, disposable gloves, coveralls, hard hats, hearing protection, safety glasses, and respirators.
Yeah, I know about respirators. I was fit tested for my respirator yesterday. In fact, it's in my locker right now.
Joe, personal protective equipment, PPE, is the worker's last line of defense against workplace hazards. Engineering and administrative controls are the preferred choices. For example, the refinery is a highly restricted area. That's an administrative control. The security process we just went through is also the start of our contamination control program. Joe, a big problem in refineries is cross-contamination. Now, that occurs when someone takes contamination from a dirty area to a clean area. For example, if your coveralls have mercury on them and you go into a lunchroom, you've just contaminated a clean area.
In an ideal hygiene facility, you have proper security. To enter a clean locker room where you change from your street clothes to your work clothes. Use the restroom and get clean PPE. At this point, you are ready to enter the refinery. We call the dirty side. Within the refinery, various aspects of the refining process occur, and metal dust and vapors may be present. At the end of your work shift or lunch, you should dispose of your contaminated work clothes. Use the laundry and restroom facilities if necessary. Then shower to remove contaminants and continue to a locker area for clean clothes. At this point, you can have lunch, go home for the day, or re-enter the refinery if necessary. It's a one-way path.
Jim, I get it now. It's like a one-way street for contamination. It can come in, but it can't go back out.
Hey, great, you have got it, Joe. You see, the company and I are concerned about you and your family. We don't want you being exposed to hazards here, and we don't want you to take any contamination home. That's why we separate your street clothes from your work clothes.
Now that you mention it, I do remember finding mercury beads in my uncle's pant cuffs and pockets. We used to play with them as kids.
Well, that doesn't happen around here anymore thanks to the hygiene controls we have in place. Well, the mercury levels are really low today, so we won't need our respirators. You ready to take the tour?
You bet.
Let's go.
Wow, this is a great view of the refinery.
Remember, Joe, beware the power of the dirty side.
Gosh, it seems like it would be really easy to accidentally contaminate the clean areas around here. What do you do if there's a spill?
Skywalker, listen to me and you shall not fail. It's important to protect yourself and your fellow miners by following the company's spill cleanup procedures.
Well, Jim, it seems like if mercury was spilled on the floor, it'd be really difficult to get it cleaned up. Maybe what we ought to do is just take a squeegee and push it down the drain.
Nice try, Joe. Actually, drains and sumps are serious sources of exposures. When mercury enters a drain, even though it's out of sight, the drain becomes what we call a point source of mercury vapor. You see, mercury continues to vaporize underwater at normal temperatures because it doesn't freeze above 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Another problem with mercury is that it's 7 times heavier than water, so it's easily caught in drain traps and tends to stay there unless it's cleaned out by hand. That cleaning further exposes a miner to mercury vapor and liquid mercury. We want you to avoid handling hazardous material.
Okay, Jim, I understand I'm supposed to avoid handling hazardous material, but what am I supposed to do if I see a spill or mercury going down a floor drain?
Joe, the key to successful mercury control hazards is containment. Think containment. For spills, you can use our mercury vacuum cleaner to pick up the hazardous material. The mercury vacuum is different than your vacuum at home, largely because of the sophisticated filtration system and the container lining designed to prevent mercury absorption. The filtration system is designed to strip mercury vapors out of the exhaust air before it re-enters the refinery area. It's very important that you follow the instructions when maintaining this machine. For example, many machines require removing the filter and storing it separately after each use. If the filter is not replaced according to the manufacturer's recommendations, mercury vapors could be exhausted back into the refinery to expose you and your fellow miners.
And if mercury is left on surfaces, that's where I use the mercury complexer that binds with the mercury to suppress mercury vapor, right?
Hey, you're right, Joe. And remember, there's no substitute for common sense, but we do rely heavily on proper training as well. You're going to be trained over the next few weeks in how to determine the most effective cleanup method for a given situation.
Well, at this point, you're aware that a mercury hazard exists and how we prevent exposure to that hazard.
Yeah, I do, Jim. Containment, containment, containment.
Right on, Joe. Look, a major engineering control we use here is ventilation.
If our ventilation system is compromised or neglected, we're in danger of being exposed to high levels of mercury vapor. That's why it's essential that local exhaust devices are properly positioned and filters checked regularly. Ductwork and connection hoses must be free of leaks. If the ventilation system is down for repair or maintenance or any other reason, the affected operations must be notified and stopped until ventilation can be restored. An important example of local ventilation is the exhaust hood over the refining furnace, sometimes called the crucible. The high heat in the crucible drives off residual mercury vapors and generates silver fume that is considered hazardous. As you can see, we've installed a large canopy over and around the crucible to channel the heated air into an overhead-mounted filtration system before it exits the building. Temperature affects mercury vapor generation. Lower temperature reduces the release of mercury vapor. Filter presses and retorts, as well as the electrowinning cathodes used in other refineries, should be cooled before they're pulled. Now this is important. The cooler the temperature, the less mercury vapor. In contrast, high temperature and cooking time are extremely important for driving off mercury. The length of cooking time in the retort depends on the amount of mercury present in the ore, the temperature, and the size of the pan being used.
Recognize those pipes coming from the retort?
I think that's the pipe that goes to the condensers right back there. Now, if I understand it correctly, the mercury vapor comes from the retort, goes into the condensers, where it's condensed into the collection pots. Then the gas continues on through the scrubbers before it's released to the outside air. Is that right?
Exactly. You see, these scrubbers are our second line of defense. Before we release any air into the general environment, we want to make sure that all mercury vapor is contained.
Finally, this plain old housekeeping is also a critical part of our control program. We want to keep our refinery as free of dust and dirt as possible. That's why you'll be trained to perform regular washdowns of floors and keep the walkways free of trash and debris. We'll also ensure that all equipment is free of dusts and deposits that may provide a collection point for mercury.
Gosh, Jim, I'm beginning to feel like there's mercury everywhere. How do I know if I'm being exposed or not on the job?
I like how you're thinking, Joe. One of the ways is through regular monitoring.
The most important kind of monitoring to you is called personal sampling, using a passive dosimeter. This device samples the air you breathe, but without a pump. We also do area monitoring with a direct reading instrument called a mercury vapor analyzer that provides real-time results. The sniffer, as we usually call it, is easy to carry into the work site and gives us a reading of mercury anywhere we use it. Our standard procedure is to sample for mercury vapors before the shift begins, immediately after the break, and in the event of emergencies or spills. Another type of monitoring is medical surveillance, which involves testing blood and urine samples to determine if the hazardous chemical is present in an employee's body and at what level.
But that doesn't mean your responsibility ends here. You see, we can make you aware of the exposure hazards here in the refinery, but it's up to you to consistently wear the appropriate PPE and to follow the health and safety guidelines that we've developed for you and your fellow employees.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Jim, are you telling me that I'm going to have to learn a whole bunch of health and safety guidelines in addition to my real job?
You do want to work here, don't you?
Yeah.
Look, health and safety never takes a back seat to production. Practicing healthy work habits is just as much a part of your job as pouring molten metal out of a furnace. You're one of our most valuable assets. We don't want to lose you to some workplace accident or occupational illness. Besides, you're going to find that working in a safe and healthy manner, look, is not as difficult as you might think. It just requires learning to follow some simple procedures like paying attention to signs.
Speaking of signs, Jim, I noticed you got a whole bunch posted all over the place here. What are all these for, anyway?
Well, Joe, most of the signs are self-explanatory. We want you to think of them as reminders of things you've been taught in your training classes. Also, we want the signs to help the visitors inside the refinery to make them aware of any hazards that they might be approaching here inside the plant.
Looks like you guys have thought of everything. Seems like a guy could kind of relax with all the training that he gets and all the signs that you have posted around.
Well, it may seem that way, but sometimes things happen that are out of the norm. A fire, explosion, power failure, these things may require you to shut everything down safely as soon as possible.
There's a lot more to this job than I realized at first. But I like the fact that there are people like you, Jim, that are concerned about my health and safety on this job.
Well, thanks, Joe. Well, now you've seen the refinery and how we work safely here. The last step to completing a safe workday is to leave all work contaminants at work. Now, here's where we take the route from the contaminated to the clean, leaving behind everything that might have any mercury or other hazardous materials on it.
Remember, be familiar with and know how to protect yourself from the hazards that you encounter in the refinery. Properly inspect, maintain, and use appropriate personal protective equipment, PPE. Follow standard operating procedures including spill cleanup procedures. Monitor and maintain ventilation systems. Conduct regular monitoring. Understand and follow warning signs. Practice good housekeeping. Know what to do in an